Dawn Butler and James O'Brien, those relentless champions of moral virtue who just can't seem to let go of hand-wringing over Britain's past, talking about maps of empire and wee horrible gammons, longing for the days of old. They demand reparations as though the tax coffers haven't been squeezed to a pulp. Let's start with Dawn, who's shocked that taxpayers helped to foot the bill to compensate slave owners. Apparently she was gobsmacked by the fact that the Slavery Abolition Act, the debt of that, wasn't paid off until 2015. Right.
The amount of money borrowed for the Slavery Abolition Act was so large that it wasn't paid off until 2015, which means that living British citizens helped pay to end the slave trade. I was absolutely shocked when I received that message, and I thought, I don't consent to my taxpayers' money paying slave owners. So there has been a precedent, Madam Deputy Speaker, in paying reparations for slavery. It's just been paid to the wrong people. There's lots of things that can be done to make sure we have reparations. And I would say that yes, it is complex to calculate what is owed, but let's not forget that in order for slavery to continue, people put a number on people's lives. People were sold for money. So if it could be done then, it can be done now.
Let's play along with this logic for a second. She's outraged that slave owners were compensated, but completely ignores the fact that Britain bankrupted itself to abolish the trade in the first place. This wasn't some luxury bailout for the white elites. It was, in fact, the single most expensive humanitarian intervention in history, with Anglican charity at its heart. But of course that doesn't fit the Britain is evil narrative, does it, for little old Dawny? Britain literally spent 40% of its national budget in 1833 to free the slaves. That's not a, oops, sorry about that gesture. That is a colossal historical sacrifice. And yet, here we are, being lectured that this wasn't enough. Reparations, says Dawn. Well, let me tell you, Dawn, we've already paid reparations of a different kind. It's called the blood, it's called the sweat, it's called the treasure that goes into the abolition of slavery, not only in the empire, but across the world too. But wait though, because it gets even better and more sanctimonious, dripping in it in fact. James O'Brien, over at LBC, miserable sod that he is, he chimed in, clutching his pearls about moral colonialism, because Britain had the audacity to block the Commonwealth from issuing its own declaration on slavery reparations, a declaration that Sir Keir Softy now says that he will sign up to earlier today. Now, apparently, James thinks that the British government should just bow its head and write a blank cheque to every Commonwealth leader who raises their hand.
British officials have successfully blocked a plan for an entirely separate declaration on the subject, which feels like a form of moral colonialism, doesn't it? Telling Commonwealth leaders that they can't even have a conversation about this thing that they consider to be hugely important. And that's the world that a lot of the people that we've been teasing in this introduction think they still live in.
Sake.
A world where Johnny Foreigner knows his place. A world where the rich man is in his castle and the poor man is at his gate. And especially if the poor man is black, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. The idea of equality, the idea of equanimity, the idea of equality is utterly alien to this world view, which appears in our breasts. In primary school and prep school, when we see the old maps, if you're my age, of the world being largely red. We don't live there anymore. Where do we live?
You've got to love how James conveniently glosses over the fact that Britain led the abolitionist movement, deploying the Royal Navy, intercepting those slave ships, with 1,600 British lives, British sailors, losing their lives in the process. But hey, You know, James O'Brien, why let the facts get in the way of a good old guilt trip, right, when you can bash those horrible gammon whites? O'Brien moans that the rich man in his castle and the poor man at his gate, he speaks of those. Except Britain's rich men were bankrupted fighting tyranny and defending freedom, not to mention the fact that it was my ancestors that were down the mines, breaking their backs, while James's sort of a supposed rich man was off debating philosophy in rich London parlours. You want reparations? Well, let's start with the working class Brits then, who suffered untold misery during the Industrial Revolution, shoveling coal and dying in trenches, so the likes of Butler and O'Brien could be free enough to moralise on the airwaves for the sanctimonious left. And let's not forget that it's not just black slaves who suffered in history. You know, I mentioned my ancestors. They didn't get a golden ticket. Coal mines and child labour weren't exactly a walk in the park. One of my ancestors died down one of those in County Durham. Do I get reparations for that? Or does it only count when it fits the current woke narrative in the ever increasingly narrow parameters of identity-based politics? What really grinds my gears is the sheer ignorance of Britain's historic role. Slavery? Yeah, there's no one, I think, alive today that thinks, yeah, that was a good thing, we should bring that back. But Britain wasn't just a participant, it was a leader in abolishing it, a move that, as I mentioned, single-handedly bankrupted an empire. So does O'Brien mention any of that? Does Butler? Of course not. They are there to peddle this victimhood narrative that keeps their grievances very much alive, ignoring the monumental price that Britain actually paid to end the vile practice in the first place. And Dawn Butler's little quip there about taxpayers' money being used to pay off slavery debts, it wasn't a precious NHS budget that suffered, was it? It was a monumental financial sacrifice to set the course for a future that rejected slavery and to encourage others. I mean, Dawn love, I hate to break it to you, but you're benefiting from the very system you're trying to tear down. Maybe you should write a cheque to the Treasury and send it back if you're that outraged. At the end of the day, you can't fix historical wrongs by dragging today's generation into a guilt-ridden obsession in which they have to self-flagellate in the classroom. What they really want here is a political power grab. It ain't about justice. It's not about righting the wrongs of the past. It's about keeping Britain on a permanent apology tour. And to that, I say it's about bloody well time we cut the tour short, we dust off the facts, and we remind ourselves that Britain, far from being a villain, was a hero. In ending that practice, it actually brought about an enlightened age. So let's hear some thanks for that, shall we? Or is it too much to ask for these parasitical reparation grifters and the guilt merchants to have to utilise a few of the brain cells they appear to be lacking? Because that's what this is. If the Caribbean right now hasn't been able to pull itself out of economic dire situations, that's down to them and the kind of awful, horrible policies and corruption that go on in countries like that. That ain't down to the British anymore. Leave us alone. We've got enough bloody problems. So Keir Starmer, if he had any balls, would tell them all to sling the hook.